Part 1. Settling into the guest room. It was late autumn when I stayed at my cousin's place for a week. Her house was an old 2-story with creaky floors and narrow hallways, the kind of place where every sound carries a little too far. She gave me the guest room at the back, a small space with a low ceiling and a single window that looked out over the yard. The first night, I unpacked my bag and sat on the bed for a while, letting the quiet settle in. The house was in a small town where the nights felt heavier, darker. Out here, streetlights were rare, so the moon was the only light pouring into the room. It spread across the floor in a pale rectangle, soft at the edges. I lay in bed listening to the stillness. Somewhere downstairs, the old refrigerator hummed, but beyond that there was nothing. No cars, no footsteps, no voices. Halfway through the week, I started noticing little things. The curtain over the window would be slightly parted in the morning, even though I was sure I'd closed it. The latch on the window frame never seemed to sit quite flush, no matter how I pushed it down. One night, as I was reading, I thought I saw movement in the yard. Just a shadow shifting across the grass. I told myself it was a tree branch swaying in the wind, but the trees were still. I got up, looked out, nothing. The yard was empty, the moonlight painting everything silver. But as I turned away from the window, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stood there longer than I needed to, as if something out there was waiting for me to linger just a little bit more. Part 2. Moonlight on the wrong side of the curtains. It was the 6th night when I woke up for no reason. My eyes opened straight to the ceiling, the pale glow of moonlight spreading across the room. At first, I thought the curtains had come loose again, but then I realized they hadn't. They were still drawn together. The light wasn't slipping through a gap. It was brighter, sharper, as if the source was closer than it should be. I sat up slowly, letting my eyes adjust. The shape of the curtains was wrong. One side bulged forward, as if something was pressing against it from outside. The fabric shifted slightly, the moonlight breaking and reforming in jagged lines along the floor. I didn't move. My breathing felt too loud. After what felt like minutes, the pressure eased. The bulge disappeared, and the curtains swayed just enough to whisper against the window frame. I waited before getting up. My legs felt heavy, but I forced myself to cross the room and pull the curtain aside. The yard was empty. The grass shimmered in the silver light, still untouched. But something else caught my eye. Near the bottom of the window, just above the sill, a faint smudge streaked across the glass. It was shaped like the curve of a hand, the heel of a palm and the faint suggestion of fingers, as if someone had leaned there close enough to see in. I didn't touch it. I just stepped back, letting the curtain fall shut again. And for the rest of the night, I stayed sitting up in bed, watching the fabric for any sign that it might move again. Part 3. The face I couldn't forget. On my last night in the guest room, the air felt different. Colder, heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding something in. I told myself it was just because I was leaving in the morning. I was tired, restless, ready to be home. I lay down early, the curtains pulled tight, the latch pressed down as far as it would go. But sometime past midnight I woke again. Not to a sound, to a feeling. That same pale light was spilling across the floor. Only this time it wasn't the soft, even glow of the moon. It was broken, interrupted by something blocking part of the window. I didn't want to look, but my eyes were already shifting toward the shape. The curtain moved just slightly, like it was caught in a slow, deliberate breath. And through the thin fabric I saw the outline, not just a shadow, features, the suggestion of a brow, the curve of a nose, the faint shape of a mouth, so close to the glass that I could almost imagine hearing the air fog it. My whole body froze. My breath caught in my chest, and I felt the prickle of sweat on the back of my neck. The face didn't move. It didn't tilt, didn't blink. It just stayed there, framed in moonlight, as if waiting for me to come closer. I shut my eyes, counted to 10. When I opened them, the shape was gone. The curtains hung still, the yard outside quiet and silver. But in the morning, when sunlight finally filled the room, I saw it again. A faint, cloudy oval on the glass, right at eye level. It was the size of a face. Part 1. Late nights at the kitchen table. I'd lived in that apartment for almost a year before I noticed anything strange. It was a small place, third floor, with a kitchen window that looked directly into the windows of the building across the alley. The distance between us couldn't have been more than 15 feet. Most nights I stayed up late working at the kitchen table. The alley below was always quiet after dark. No traffic, no pedestrians, just the occasional clatter of a trash can when the wind picked up. The only real light came from the apartments across the way, glowing in yellow squares. One night in early spring, I glanced up from my laptop and noticed the window directly opposite mine was open. I'd never paid attention to it before, but now I could see inside. It looked like a living room. Couch, floor lamp, shelves crowded with books. The light was on, but no one was there. I remember thinking how strange it was to leave a window open in the middle of the night. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing that same room lit up at odd hours. Sometimes at 2 or 3 in the morning, the lamp would still be on, the curtains drawn back, but I never saw anyone moving inside. Then one night, as I was working, I saw movement, a figure passing through the frame. I looked up fully, expecting them to walk across and disappear. But they stopped, and for a long moment, they stood just inside the window, looking out. It was impossible to tell if they were looking at me, but I didn't move until the light went out. Part 2, the figure in the opposite window. It became a habit I didn't want to admit to. Every night while I worked, I'd glance up at that window across the alley, half expecting to see the lamp on. More often than not, it was. The figure returned on the third night. I spotted them from the corner of my eye, a shape shifting into the light, pausing just inside the glass. I tried to focus on my laptop, telling myself I wasn't about to play some silent staring game with a stranger, but curiosity got the better of me. When I looked up again, they were still there, standing perfectly still, just inside the open window. The light caught their outline enough for me to tell they were facing my direction. I didn't wave. I didn't nod. I just sat frozen, my hands still on the keyboard. After what felt like minutes, they stepped back into the shadows and vanished. The next night it happened again. Same time, same position, same stillness. It was too precise to be coincidence. That's when I noticed something that made my skin prickle. The lamp in that room never turned on or off while I was watching. It was always just on when I sat down and off when I wasn't looking. One night I decided to close my own blinds before the lamp across the alley came on. I wanted to break whatever pattern had been forming. But at 1:47 a.m., a faint knock came from my side window, the one facing the fire escape. When I slid the blinds apart, the opposite window was dark. Part 3, when the reflection moved first. After the knock on my side window, I kept the blinds closed for days. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I still avoided the kitchen at night. It was a Thursday when I finally sat down at the table again. The blinds were drawn, but a thin strip at the bottom let in just enough light from across the alley for me to notice the glow. The lamp was on again. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my screen. But my coffee had gone cold, and when I reached for it, my eyes caught the faint reflection in the darkened glass of the cabinet beside me. In that reflection, the opposite window was perfectly framed, and in it, a figure. I froze, not turning around. The reflection showed them standing the same way they had before, just inside the window. But something about the posture was different, leaning forward. I kept my eyes locked on the cabinet glass. Then it happened. The reflection moved, a slow tilt of the head before I moved at all. I stood up sharply, turning toward the window. The lamp across the alley flickered and went out, plunging the space into shadow. When I looked back at the cabinet, the reflection was still there for a second longer, before fading, like the image had taken longer to disappear than it should have. That night, I shut every blind in the apartment and didn't open them again until morning. The next time I looked out into the alley, the opposite window was empty, and the lamp was gone. Part 1. Alone with the forest, outside. The cabin had been a last-minute rental. I wanted somewhere quiet to work, somewhere I wouldn't hear traffic or neighbours slamming doors. The listing promised panoramic forest views, which turned out to mean floor-to-ceiling windows along 2 walls of the living room. When I arrived, the sun was just dipping behind the trees. The glass reflected streaks of orange and gold, the forest beyond already fading into shadow. It was beautiful, but it also meant there was nothing between me and the outside world except a thin sheet of glass. The first night was uneventful. I sat at the long wooden table with my laptop, occasionally glancing out at the moon rising over the treetops. The forest looked still, almost painted. It wasn't until the second night that I noticed how exposed I felt after dark. The lights inside turned the windows into mirrors, and beyond them was only blackness. If anything moved out there, I'd never see it, but it would see me. Around midnight, I stepped outside for some air. The cold bit through my sleeves, and the forest loomed silent and watchful. I didn't stay long. When I came back in, my breath still clouding the air, I glanced at the wide window by the couch. There was a faint smudge high up on the glass, too high for me to have made it. It looked almost like the curve of a fingertip. Part 2. The handprint that wasn't there before. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe residue from a bird brushing the glass, or a mark the cleaning crew had missed. But when I looked again the next morning, the smudge was gone. Completely. That night I kept the lights low. The glass reflected more of the room that way, and I thought maybe it would help me feel less visible. I tried to focus on my work, but my eyes kept drifting to the windows. It was just after 1 a.m. when I noticed it again. The handprint. Only this time it was lower on the glass and clearer. I could see the curve of the palm, the faint stretch of fingers, 5 of them spread wide. It hadn't been there when I sat down. I stood up slowly, my chair legs scraping against the floor. The print was on the outside of the glass, pale in the moonlight. The forest was still. Not even a breeze moved the branches. I stepped closer, trying to see past my own reflection. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The handprint wasn't smudged or streaked like someone had pressed and slid their hand. It was perfectly clean at the edges, like the hand had rested there without shifting. I stayed frozen until my legs started to ache. Finally, I backed away, keeping my eyes on the glass until I was in the bedroom. I shut the door and pulled the curtains tight. The next morning I went to check. The glass was spotless, no handprint, no sign anything had been there at all, but I knew it had. Part 3. The last night I slept in that room. On the final night I decided to leave the living room dark. No lamps, no overhead light, just the faint silver of the moon spilling across the floor through the wide panes of glass. I told myself it would help me see out into the forest if anything moved. For the first hour, nothing happened. I sat on the couch, my laptop closed, just listening. The forest at night wasn't as silent as I thought. Tiny sounds carried in from outside, a branch settling, a distant owl, my own pulse in my ears. It was sometime after midnight when I saw it. A shape moved between the trees, too tall and deliberate to be an animal. It stopped just at the edge of the clearing, half hidden in shadow, facing the cabin. I didn't move. The figure stayed there for a long moment before stepping forward. The moonlight caught something pale. A hand, lifted slowly, pressing against the glass. The sound was faint but sharp, the skin meeting cold glass with a quiet tap. 5 fingers spread wide. I was sitting barely 6 feet away. I didn't breathe. My eyes locked on that handprint, watching the edges frost slightly in the cold. Then, as slowly as it had appeared, the hand lifted away. The figure stepped backward into the trees. I stayed there until the first light of morning turned the windows gold. When I finally got up, there was no print, no mark at all. But I left the cabin that day without looking back, because I knew, if I did, the glass might not be empty anymore. Moonlight has a way of making everything look softer, gentler, until you realize it also turns windows into stages. And when you're standing in the light, you can't see the audience. These stories stay with me because they don't end with answers. They end with moments. A handprint on the glass, a face behind a curtain, a figure standing too still for too long. Small, quiet moments that rearrange how you think about your own space at night. Because the truth is, we all pass by our windows without thinking. We glance out at the street, the yard, the trees, certain that what's outside is far away. But in the dark, that thin pane of glass is the only thing separating you from whatever's looking back. Maybe nothing ever will. Or maybe, one night, you'll notice something that wasn't there before. A shadow in a place it shouldn't be. A reflection that moves before you do. The curve of a palm against the glass, faint in the moonlight, and you'll feel it, that stillness on the other side, holding you in its gaze. If that happens, don't step closer. Don't linger. Just turn away, let the curtain fall, and keep the light behind you. Because some things are easier to forget if you never see them clearly in the first place.